Over the last few weeks, I've been asked a lot of repeat questions about the new player experience for Warframe and what I do and don't like. I'm going to try and answer these questions in two separate videos, beginning with what I dislike. Let me preface this by saying I'm not doing this video to hate on the game. I have no problem with digital extremes or whatever you might think in this video. I don't play games I don't like. Period. That's just not how I roll. I'm hoping everything I say is going to come off as what it's meant to be, which is constructive. Nothing I mention is game breaking or a reason for me to quit. You don't have to like everything, and it's okay if you don't. There's plenty I do like about Warframe. First, let's see what I dislike. Before I go into that, let me begin with one of the questions everyone seems to think I dislike, which is the very beginning of the game. Personally, I didn't find it very difficult. The beginning is rather hand-holdy, but that's really standard for most multiplayer games these days. I know many of us who are experienced players in MMOs or similar games will find it way too easy and boring. But think of it from the perspective of someone who's never touched a game before. They need that hand-holding or they're not going to make it. Were the enemies too easy? Yeah, a little bit. The first few missions kind of felt more like a hack and slash than anything that actually required strategy, mechanics, thinking, or using any of my abilities I had unlocked. My first real fight with Vor was really simple to do, and I felt like I got it over with really quickly. Now, the second time I faced a planetary boss, the difficulty spike ramped up and suddenly mechanics came into play. But that part isn't a dislike. I don't know why some people think it is. Here's why I think the beginner enemies are easy if you're an experienced player with, well, these type of games. If you're not an experienced player, this could actually be difficult, or it could give you some level of a thrill seeing your Warframe plow through enemies like water. Guys, I've been playing games since the 1980s. And I've been playing online capable games since the late 1990s. Going ham on a group of enemies doesn't always have the same oomph it might have for someone who's never seen it before. So remember, all of what I say is coming from the perspective of a person who's been gaming longer than half of you have been alive. And many of you who are asking me that question, well, you have a similar perspective. With all that said, now is a very good time to tell you all to go clean your room. Now. One thing I noticed about the new player experience is the way people feel about the first few missions. I know a lot of people have told me they thought they were overly easy, there was not enough emphasis on certain things. I don't think you understand that Warframe does have some unique ways of getting around. Those tutorials aren't only teaching new players how to aim and shoot. They're also teaching us how to get around quickly, use the bullet jump, slide, wall jumping, and all the rest of it. It's not just woo, go into combat, it's here's how you move. But that's going to bring me to my first dislike. What I just talked about is also an extremely confusing experience for new players. Because there is something new players are truly missing, and that is solid tutorials on the different systems you encounter. While I love Ortis and Lotus explaining to us how to grab parts to get things going in our ship, we're not really told how to use those things very well. Let's take mods, for example. Mods are kind of like magnets. You don't know how they work. In order to really get that information, you have to go look it up or get some help from the player base. The depths of the systems are great, because a lot of them do require a bit of thinking, a little bit of theory crafting, and I love that part, but you really can't expect a new player to just click around and get it. We're not able to. The tiny little tutorial for mods is not a good one. It leaves a lot of new players, including me, confused on what to do and how to use them. There really needs to be some more in-depth tutorials or information on the systems new players are going to encounter early on. Another thing that I dislike are the difficulty spikes and the way they happen, because there doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason behind them. We're going to take the plains of Eidolon, for example. Earth is really easy to do for a new player. You go through a really neat story, do some missions, get in the hang of things, and suddenly you've got blueprints. Once you find out those blueprints come from bounties on Earth, you just think you can go do them. After all, Earth was easy to do. Very quickly, you find out that's not the case. For me, it wasn't something discouraging because I've had so much help along the way, but a new player who hasn't made friends yet, or someone who's chilling doing their solo thing, that could be a really discouraging and even game-breaking experience for them because they don't understand that the difficulty ramps up like that. Even a simple warning that the difficulty spikes are there could help out a lot. There's a few other places where difficulty spikes become an issue as well. I think the Jupiter Junction is a big one, as are the bounties on Deimos, or Deimos. I'm still not sure how that's pronounced. I really do wish that DE had some level of communication with new players to explain where and why, maybe not why, just where difficulty spikes go up. I would be okay with the difficulty spike if I noticed a linear progression, but that's not what happens. You go from these really easy Earth missions to, oh my god, dead on the bounties, then you go to Venus, where again, the missions are pretty easy to do. Speaking of Venus, I like that story. I think the intro with We All Live Together made it grabbed you. I do hope there's more to the story in the future. I'm not too far in the story yet, so we'll see. The Warframe story so far, it's really good. I do not like the gating on the story progress, though. This is a very jarring stop when you're told to go and grind out like 3 planets or a ton of missions in order to progress. A forced grind is never a good thing, and it's something I've experienced in other games and I really didn't like it. In fact, Final Fantasy XIV used to have some pretty harsh level gates for the main story. They realized how quickly players disliked that, and they made a change. I really hope DE does the same. I want the story. I like story-driven and story-rich games that give me all sorts of stuff to do on the side, but I don't want to be forced to do something in a game. It's a game. I'm playing it for fun, not because I feel like it's a job. It's kind of like you're being told, oh, you get to play with this puppy for a while, but I'm holding it for ransom until you go to do these tasks that I've given to you. Then you can have the puppy back, but you may not get the puppy yet. No, no, no. You have some more tasks to do, my friend. That's a really deflating experience for people, and it's not something that I like. Fortunately, I've had a lot of help, which makes the grind a little nicer because you can just go with your friends and do stuff. However, that's also something I don't like. No, I don't dislike the community. I think I've made that very clear. You are all awesome, and DE is a fantastic company. I do have some concerns about Soulframe, but I'm going to save those until we know more about the game. But again, that doesn't reflect on DE. That's just more like, what y'all doing here? Anyway, I digress. Digital Extremes has cultivated such an amazing community, and it's clear they care about their community. But I don't like the heavy dependency on the player base for help. A new player should not have to depend on the rest of the player base like they do in Warframe. Anytime there's a question, the answer is usually to ask others. Granted, you will get your answers, which is amazing because most players in Warframe are indeed friendly. But this also goes back to the lack of tutorials issue. I think DE has just allowed their player base to be the tutorials, and that shouldn't be the case. And if it should be the case, if that was intended, find a way to tell players that, even if it's a simple thing of Lotus saying, hey, other Tennos can and will help you, and if they're mean, I'll send them to their room. Once again, just a small piece of communication to send a new player in the right direction would be so helpful here. If DE doesn't want new players so dependent on the existing community, a quick message of where to find the wiki would be golden for people. Especially those of us coming from certain MMOs or multiplayer games with notoriously toxic communities. We're not going to ask the player base for help unless we know for sure we can. If there's no communication to us that we can, we're just not gonna. I think a great example of this was last night. I and my friend went through a mission. He accidentally left it on public and somebody at random jumped in. They asked me how my robot played music, and I explained the Warframe of Octavia and what she does, at least what I know of what she does. Then this person told me that they were new, and we chatted for a minute. I asked if they'd met anybody to help them out yet, and they said no, they hadn't. They'd been soloing trying to get Yareli. I got really lucky in becoming a part of the community very quickly. Not all new players have that benefit. They need some level of communication, kind of pushing them toward the right spaces. Don't worry, I told the guy about my Discord channel and said there's a lot of experienced players who can help them out. The truth is that many MMOs or multiplayer games are becoming less social than they were in the past, and it's harder to make friends and reach out unless you have a dedicated space for it. New players need to know where that space is. A lot of games flounder with this issue these days, and it's certainly not just DE. If you're going to ask me what else I dislike about the game, I would say spy missions. I really hate them. But I can't count that as an actual dislike. I think that's more of a personal preference, which is different, and I'm always going to complain about them, but they're not really a dislike. Okay, yeah, I do dislike them, actually. I really freaking dislike spy missions. Overall, though, I like Warframe. There are a few things that I wish were different or maybe a little better. That doesn't mean I'm hating on it, doesn't mean I'm mad about it. I am repeating that because that's important. Some of these things I mentioned aren't great, but I can overlook them or hope to see them change thanks to the other great things the game has to offer. And what are those other great things? Well, you'll find out about that in the next video.